Welcome to today's live stream, and there's a lot going on, to be honest, in the MMA world. We've got Alex Pereira, Khalil Roundtree. We had a fun fight card. We've got some serious contenders. We've got Kyle Bahio in the mix. We've got McGregor saying he wants to come back. Jon Jones is training elbows. It's all quite crazy. Thank you for the support, Mr. Antov. You are more than welcome. Who is next for Michael Venom Page? Good question. I think with MVP, he puts himself in that bracket where you need fun matchups, you need big names, and you need big cards. He's a showman, and I think the UFC need to definitely recognise that and facilitate that. We don't need to see any grapplers. We need to see big names that are going to be fun in the striking. Now, when we think of the welterweight division, that brings to my mind someone like Neil Magny, quite possibly. I think that's probably what's next for MVP. So I think for Kyle Bahalo, I think for Kyle, he's going to go one of three places. I think you either give him the loser of Whittaker Chimaev, the loser between Imavov and Brendan Allen, or you go straight for the jugular and you give him Israel Adesanya. I think he's a fun matchup, got a good amount of momentum, good gym, fun narrative, fun striker. I think that one makes a lot of sense. But I don't hate the idea of even possibly a Kaio and a Marvin Vettori on his return. But I know Vettori has injured his arm, so I'm not sure on how long he'll be. There's a lot of fun things to do at middleweight now. It's just getting a drop of new blood. Do I think Kane Musa will make it to the UFC? I imagine that he's going to have a couple more fights in his career, and I imagine he would probably do them in the PFL/Bellator. I do think Dustin Poirier is going to come back. I do. Now, where does he go with the matchup? I'm not a massive fan of seeing that Justin Gaethje fight again. I would rather see a fresh matchup. I think the fight to make is Dustin Poirier, Colby Covington at 170 pounds. I think it makes perfect sense for both guys. Huge names, good narrative going into the fight. Both are in those sort of conversations. We don't have to have a weight cut from Dustin Poirier. We know that Colby's not the biggest 170 pounder. I think that one's a good one. What's next for Volk? Volk's going to have the winner out of Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway. Now, it's going to be a tough sell, the Max Holloway fight, but if he goes out there and stops Justin Gaethje, if he goes out there and stops Ilia Topuria, what more do you need to do to go and have a fourth fight, which would be unprecedented? We've never really seen anything like that, but Max Holloway is just that guy, so we can't take that off the table yet. Either way that goes, we're going to see a rematch, whether it's Max Holloway or whether it's Ilia Topuria. That's what Volk gets next. However, if they try and do a massive fight in the interim, then I think Alex Volkanovski versus Charles Oliveira is a beautiful matchup. I do believe the UFC are going to go more down the lines of Charles Oliveira and Dan Hooker, which I think is a fight which really makes a lot of sense in the lightweight division. You got two big names. Charles did have a close with Arman Sarukian, but Dan Hooker's coming off a phenomenal amount of momentum with good wins like Jalen Turner, Gamrot, and I think they're two superstars in the lightweight division that you know you're going to get an exciting fight. And it's one of those matchups where the UFC doesn't really get a loser, if that makes sense. Kyle versus Adesanya is the fight to make. Have I been to many events? I have. I've been to a lot of events in the UK. I've been to some events in Thailand, Abu Dhabi. So, some all over the place. Kai Asakura versus Alexander Pantoja for 310, I think is a fantastic idea. We have enough precedence in the flyweight division to suggest that they probably would look at someone like a Kai Asakura coming over from Risen. And even though he hasn't had a fight yet in the UFC, a fun style and new blood to chuck into the title mix. Now, is it the most deserved? Well, he hasn't had a fight in the organisation. But have we seen things like that at flyweight before? Most certainly. So I can see them doing that. And it's quite a fun matchup. And talking of fun matchups, we have Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Royval. And if you want to talk about fun scraps, that needs to be at the top, because that is going to be insanity. The pacing of that fight will be ridiculous. Brandon Royval has shown time and time again just how exciting he is, but how skilled he is. And Tatsuro Taira is a puzzle that not many people can solve, and he's seriously fun on the mic. So you bring those two together, we're going sizzler in the flyweight division. I think there's some really fun fights to make. Do I think that Islam Makhachev moves up to welterweight? I believe he needs 2 more fights. He needs the Arman Sarukian fight, first and foremost. And if he wins that, there could be a conversation to go up to welterweight then, dependent on who's champion. But likely 1 more. Likely 1 more. I would say 2 more fights, and then let's see Islam go up to welterweight and potentially do something that his coach could never do in Khabib. And that would really shake up the conversations between some of the greatest of all time in the lightweight division. Because as it stands, Islam Makhachev is most certainly the pound for pound best fighter in the world. He is so skilled from every range. Whether you stand at range in a kickboxing battle, you're going to have problems. If you are advancing as one of the best strikers in featherweight history in Volkanovski, he managed to counter-strike, moving backwards and laterally. That seriously impressed me. He's gone out there now and fought Dustin Poirier in the boxing range. And whilst people say it's his wrestling threat which set up his hands, there is an element of truth to that. But what people aren't considering is the threat of a takedown doesn't give you boxing ability to slip and counter shots in the pocket against Dustin Poirier. So let's not forget how good this man is at every distance. In the clinch, he's got knees, elbows, throws, takedowns. We know how methodical and strong he is there. So pound for pound at the moment, Islam is doing a job. Not to mention that he's got stoppage wins over Alex Volkanovski and Charles Oliveira, which when he fought them, they were both in the top 5 pound for pound fighters. Insane activity. Fighting nerds are on an absolute tear at the moment. Let's be very clear about that. They are smashing it. And the thing that I love so much about fighting nerds is, yes, they have a lot of talent coming out of their gym, but they're not trying to make the same fighter out of each athlete. They implement their strategy, their game plans, and their cerebral approach to mixed martial arts, but then they do it through the talented athletes they have, like Prates, like Caio, like Ruffy, John Silva. Seriously high-level guys, and they're not stopping. Yeah, we need to give an honourable mention to Michael Morales, because this is a fight I've been high on for a very long time. And if you're in the welterweight division and you need a tough test, they call one man. It's Neil Magny. And you go one of 2 ways against Neil Magny. You are either the very elite, of which you will pass that test, and it goes to prove that you can be in the conversations with top 5s, potentially title fights in a couple of bouts. Or you can have talent, but not be good everywhere. Maybe you lack in IQ, conditioning, grappling. Neil Magny will expose that. Well, Michael Morales went out in the first round and showed us not only is he exciting, not only can he strike and he can grapple, but he can land a spinning elbow from the clinch and get a finish over Neil Magny in the first. We cannot understate how impressive of a performance that is. Seriously impressive from Michael Morales. I've been saying that's one to watch for a long time. What do you do with him next? I think you can go Sizzler. I think you can go Carlos Prates. Is obviously a matchup that people are talking about because the styles are so fun. But you've got the likes of Jack Della Maddalena in welterweight. You've got the likes of Ian Gary, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Sean Brady, Carlos Prates, Michael Morales. 170 pounds is the sleeper division. Been saying this. Did I watch CJI? I most certainly did watch CJI. And what Craig Jones has done over the last 90 days is one of the most impressive feats in recent sport. The way that he transcended jiu-jitsu in a matter of 3 months was pure insanity. The marketing strategy, the way that he set up the entire event, how smoothly it ran, the production, the talent, the prize money, the end product, the ability to create viral clips, the ability to create an event which was seamless for the consumer in regards to free streaming, in regards to having constant action with the pit, in regards to having transparent scoring, the way that he completely transparently revealed all of the numbers, how much people were making, how many concurrent viewers on the stream, how many impressions. It was genius from start to finish. Make no mistake, Craig Jones may go on his podcast and act as if he doesn't have a clue what he's doing and he's just trolling people. Make no mistake, this was a genius move from start to finish. And one man that is not getting enough conversation right now in middleweight, as you've correctly pointed out, Michel Pereira. Michel Pereira, Fluffy Hernandez, what a fight that is. And to be honest, I don't know how that looks, because since Michel Pereira has gone up to middleweight, the man has looked like a completely different beast. And it's easy to forget that he's just coming into his prime years as well, young 30s. And then you look at Fluffy Hernandez, this is a man with conditioning, with boxing. We've seen him melt good kickboxers like Kopolov. We've seen him submit Rodolfo Vieira. We've seen ridiculous conditioning, and we've seen him put together a very impressive win streak. So you look at 185 pounds now with Michel Pereira, with Fluffy Hernandez, things are getting pretty exciting. They're getting real exciting. What is the hardest MMA style to learn? Honestly, probably speaking more generally, it's going to be wrestling. If you've never wrestled and you don't come from a grappling background, it's probably going to be wrestling. Usually people pick up striking easier. Not saying it is easy, but they usually are able to pick that up a little bit better. But when it comes to grappling, obviously the movements are a lot more nuanced and also new if you've never done anything like that. But to be perfectly honest, it's going to be different for every different person. Some people are just going to have a natural enjoyment of grappling and they just understand the movement patterns better. Some people are going to have a hard time with striking. So it is very down to the individual as well. There's not really any blanket statement you can throw on that. Michael Morales versus the loser of Sean Brady and Gilbert Burns, I think, is a brilliant idea. A brilliant idea. And the fact that we've got 5 rounds of Sean Brady and Gilbert Burns coming up is exciting, because we know Sean Brady's grappling is ridiculously tough to stop. And then we know the ground game and the credentials of Gilbert Burns as well. So one would imagine that they neutralize each other on the ground and this stays standing. We haven't, of course, seen Sean Brady have as much exposure on the feet, and we know what Gilbert Burns brings to the table in regards to his gameness, in regards to his knockout power. That's a fun fight for 5 rounds, that really is. And that's a good point that you say about Michael Morales. That's always the thing that's impressed me watching him, is his composure. At that age, to have that composure on the big stage and to be so present is very impressive. I believe Michael Morales and Shavkat is premature, because Shavkat is more so in that title conversation, and I think he should fight for the title next. However, we do need to start having Michael Morales in very real conversations. Very real conversations. And talking about real conversations, Petr Yan versus Davison Figueiredo. Who would not want to see Petr Yan versus Figgy? That is a phenomenal matchup. And the bantamweight division, in my opinion, is the deepest, most talented division. And you look at the skill sets of No Mercy and of God of War, that's a no-brainer. In fact, I even think you can make that a 5-rounder co-main on a pay-per-view or fight night itself and just give it its own event, because that's the sort of matchup that deserves it. And honestly, what does Davison Figueiredo have to do at bantamweight to get a title shot? The man's come over as one of the best flyweights of all time, one of the most entertaining, and he's gone on and put on spectacular performances continually, not only at 125, but 135 now as well, and putting together some good momentum. So that man is probably one fight away from a title shot. And if he were to be fighting for the title next, you couldn't really argue with that. Jon Jones is the best in the world, and that's all that needs to be said. People have a very weird conversation around Jon Jones right now. Is he the best in the world? Technically speaking, he holds the heavyweight belt, so he would suggest he's the best heavyweight in the world. Now, in my opinion, you have to have some level of activity to confidently say that. Now, if that was 6 months ago, even a year ago, we could have that conversation. It's been multiple years since we've seen Jon Jones, and since then, the interim champion has gone out, defended the belt, and has beat 6 of the top 10 and stopped all of them within the first. And the other guy, not Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall, just Guy X, Guy Y, so we can remove emotion of their previous careers, because that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking as things stand. One man, has 8 wins at heavyweight, and the other has 1. One has a good stoppage in the first round. One has 8 stoppages, 7 in the first round. It's like, what are we really doing here? It's not much of a conversation, in my opinion. So is Jon Jones one of the best ever? Sure. For sure. Innovator? 100%. Longevity? Insane. Entertainer? Certainly agree with you. Current best heavyweight in the world? Probably not. Probably not. And if Tom was just burning through contenders and he was maybe sitting at 5 or 4 and we were saying he needs to fight Jon next, I would understand why that conversation would be skipped. But that isn't what's happening. He quite literally has a belt around his shoulder that he's been defending. Why did he get the interim belt? Because he stepped in for Jon Jones and fought him, Sergey Pavlovich that is, the scariest guy in the heavyweight division, on a week's notice to fill in for Jon, and starches him within 69 seconds with an injured back in Madison Square Garden. And people are still trying to tell me that the fight with Stipe is more relevant because he's a legend. 50% of this sport wasn't even watching before 2020. They may have never even seen Stipe fight, but they've seen Aspinall's entire career. You have to remember, this sport is what have you done for me lately with the fan base. And what has Tom done lately? An awful lot. An awful lot. I think it's going to be difficult for Volk to come back to his prime. But do I think he can come back and beat anyone at featherweight and lightweight right now? There's a good chance. He hasn't lost his skill set. Do I think with a good amount of time off and healing that he could come and still beat anyone? Yeah, for sure. That's just the style that he has. Although he's had a couple of bad knockouts, he's never been someone which has had a style to take a lot of damage. So when we look at it stylistically with people like Charles Oliveira or someone like a Beneil Dariush, not bad fights. Who can beat Dricus? Good question. Sean Strickland first and foremost. I think Sean Strickland, whilst it'll be a very difficult fight for him, like it would be for anyone. Sean Strickland can beat Dricus du Plessis. Difficult, but can definitely do it. And you have a look at where he had success in that fight against Dricus. Because of his defense is so good, because his kicking defense is so good, he shut down a lot of the best attributes of Dricus. And there were times where he could just slightly improve without making drastic changes. Du Plessis done a fantastic job of stealing rounds. Optics, as Eric Nixick would say. In the last 30 seconds, he would get the takedown and steal a round. Just small changes in the tide there. I think Sean Strickland can steal back a couple more of those rounds and eke out a win. Times that he just ended up in scrambles, slightly more offensive play, I think, again, you could get a win. I was listening to Eric Nixick reference Brad Tavares against du Plessis, where he ended up on top a lot. If Sean gets in those spots and just adds a few punches, I think the outcome of the fight could be very different. But then again, the momentum of Dricus du Plessis, the confidence of the man right now, it's hard to bet against him, against anyone. But there are people there that do have the skill sets to beat him, but it's the will at the end of the day as well. You have to know that you're going into trench warfare, essentially, with Dricus du Plessis. I think Oban Elliott has all the chance to keep on rising through the ranks. Got some good experience now in the UFC, and he's just catching his stride, just getting comfortable under the lights. And once people start getting comfortable and knowing how to win, you can start putting together win streaks. And he has a character which is going to be easy to sell. So it's never going to be someone that the UFC is necessarily trying to hold back. And that's a good point about Dricus. He does have an entire country behind him as well. Does Khamzat Chimaev beat Robert Whittaker? I think it's a difficult fight. And when you look where Whittaker has had problems before, it's against southpaws. You watch against Izzy, he had a problem with the left straight in a southpaw position. You watch the Dricus du Plessis finish, it began because of the jab from southpaw. And we have seen that Chimaev likes to switch stances, and he did land effectively the jab from southpaw against Gilbert Burns in their fight. Very different style of fighter, but we've seen patterns to suggest that he could use elements of that skill set. So I think Rob has to close that gap, and he has to be at his very best, and then I think he can win that fight. Of course, being 5 rounds, you're always going to lean towards Bobby Knuckles because we've seen him in that fight so many times before. We've never seen Chimaev in a 5-round fight. So the first question is, does he make it to the fight? The second question is, what does it look like if he doesn't get a finish early on? In which case, you're always going to favour Rob. But you can never count out Chimaev walking into the octagon, going balls to the wall for the first 10-15 minutes, and finishing anyone. It's hard to suggest that he doesn't have that capability because he does. So it's a probability game at that point. What's next for MVP? Good question. I've said a couple of names, but I'm interested to see what other people would like to see from MVP. What would people like to see next from Michael Venom Page? Because welterweight is getting fun, and that is a big name to throw in the mix. Big name to throw in the mix. Go to 185 pounds. It's not the craziest suggestion. I don't know if it's the right suggestion. I don't know. It's not anything I'd even thought about. But I like Michael Venom Page versus Jeff Neal. I think that's the fight to make. The more I think about it, the more I think that's the fight to make. You've got the boxing that we're used to seeing from Jeff Neal, the fundamentals done to a very high level, and you can say the same for Michael Venom Page, but just a different style of attacks. the more traditional karate versus the more traditional boxing. I think that's a very fun matchup. Jeff Neal versus MVP. Both have good name values. Both put themselves back in good conversations in a welterweight division. And both would provide good momentum to start being in conversations for big fights. Because with a win over either guy, that's what you do. I think Jeff Neal versus Michael Venom Page is the fight to make. On paper, it's fun. In the rankings, it makes sense. Name value, it makes sense. I think that one's a no-brainer. Do I think Jon Jones is scared to fight Tom Aspinall? I don't believe Jon Jones is scared, but I believe he's tremendously logical. On one hand, you have a fighter who's considered the greatest ever, who is coming off a knockout loss, hasn't fought in almost 4 years and is 43, but has legendary status. On the flip side, you have a guy entering his prime, finished 6 of the top 10, is knocking everyone out within a minute, and is a legitimate heavyweight threat everywhere the fight goes. I don't think he's scared. I think he's strategic and understands that preserving that O is very important for his legacy and ego. And his best bet of doing that from a probability standpoint is Stipe Miocic. Does that mean he has no chance of beating Tom Aspinall? Most certainly not. And I wouldn't count him out. But if we're looking at probabilities, we would be stupid to suggest that Stipe at the moment has a higher percentage chance of beating Jon than Tom does, given the circumstances, given the age, given the frequency of activity, given the caliber of activity, and given the momentum. It's as simple as that. Okay, last few questions. Last few questions, my people. And the other day, yesterday, I listened to the feedback that I got on my live streams, and I have set up subscription models. So I will be doing some sub-only live streams, and also within that, you get behind the scenes footage. I'll do some profile reviews, and there's different tier systems as well. So I set that up yesterday. What's next for Paddy Pimblett? I think the ideal matchup for Paddy is Beneil Dariush. I think that ticks all of the boxes in regards to name value, in regards to stylistic matchup, momentum, and also leap in the rankings. Because you go out there and finish a name like Beneil Dariush at 155 pounds, you're then being thrown around the biggest names in the sport and title conversations at lightweight. And people can get upset about that, but when you bring to the table what Paddy Pimblett does, there's no debate about it. And if you're going out and finishing opponents in exciting fights, there's really no debate. You look at how they slowballed Sean O'Malley until they didn't. He was 11 ranked facing Petr Yan, got the win, boom, title. Very similar trajectory, I believe, with Paddy Pimblett. Gets a ranking in Bobby Green, fantastic performance, very good competition, throws him in with a Beneil Dariush around the top 5, boom, gets a good win, title picture conversations. So I think that matchup is the most logical one to make right now. How do I rate Chimaev's stand-up? I think Chimaev is tremendously talented everywhere it goes. Now, sometimes I do think that he could fight more strategically in regards to preserving his gas tank, in regards to picking his moments to look for the finish, especially when he's fighting the tougher guys in his division, upper weight class in middleweight, and also over 5 rounds. I think he's going to have to be more selective about where he pushes for that finish, because you don't want to be in the 3rd round blowing your load trying to get rid of Bobby Knuckles, but he does enough to survive. He wrestles up on a single, he recovers very well, and now you're in the 4th and 5th with someone as seasoned as Robert Whittaker, and you're tired. it's going to be a tough spot. So I think he has all the skills. I just think he has to be a little bit more selective. The same as any fighter has to be. No fighter in the world can go complete red line for 25 minutes at the very top level. You just can't do it. Last couple. And then I am going to go. Thoughts on JDM versus Shavkat? I believe Jack Della Maddalena should fight Kamaru Usman. That's the perfect stylistic matchup. It's the perfect name recognition. And it's the perfect opponent for both guys to be put straight back into a title conversation for Kamaru Usman and to be inserted for the first time in Jack Della Maddalena. I think Jack is strong enough with his ground game to mitigate what Kamaru Usman brings with his wrestling, keep it standing, and then we have a fun boxing match, I believe. And there's not many more fun, exciting fighters to watch on the feet than Jack Della Maddalena. In regards to Shavkat, I believe he fights for the title next. The lowest finishing percentage of any champion versus the highest finishing percentage of any fighter in the UFC. It's a fun narrative to run. But that's going to wrap it up for today. Like I said, if you'd like some sub-only live streams, if you'd like some profile reviews, giveaways, and different things that I am doing on those subscription models, then you can find that on my page or even in this live stream, I believe. And that is going to round it up for today. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the comments and the engagement. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the card this weekend. Have a lovely, productive week, and I will catch you same time tomorrow at 6 p.m. for a live stream. As always, keep it casual.